Well, speaking of yelling and screaming, we need your unfiltered thoughts on Texas from an Oklahoma fan's perspective.
Wait, to
Well,
clarify, not too unfiltered. My mom does listen to this podcast. So
noted. Well, so like Texas historically and Texas in 2024. Texas historically, it never fails because during the offseason, you're kind of like you kind of look at the offseason like as podcasters, as content creators, and go, boy, what are we going to talk about in June? What's going to happen? Like, hopefully, no players get arrested because that and then we'd have something to talk about. But no one wants to say anything about that.
Right.
But usually, what happens is weird, silly things come out from respected media members who also, like me, have access to this thing called Google, where you can just go Texas football history, where you just go through the years and go 8-4, 8-4, 6-5. Oh, they're not as good as I thought they should be. How does OU have all these? How does OU have more wins and more national titles and more everything than them? How? They have all the money. That's what they're the cool brand, right? I thought that mattered. Well, it doesn't. Texas historically is bad. I mean, they're not Texas A&M bad, but they are not as good as you would assume. Especially when you consider that for the vast majority of their history, when they were in the Southwest Conference, they rarely, if ever, in the years where they didn't play Arkansas in Fayetteville, they rarely left the state of Texas. Their big bowl game was the Cotton Bowl, played in Dallas. Their big rivalry game was with Oklahoma, played in Dallas. Then they played all the regional city schools in the state of Texas. And then, yeah, like I said, maybe every once in a while they play Arkansas. So they had all this built-in advantage, and yet Oklahoma has lapped them not once, not twice, but thrice in terms of wins, national titles, Heisman's, All-Americans, first-round draft picks, NFL picks, anything you can, like, whatever metric you think is important, OU's lapped them. So historically, Texas, I'm sorry, just not as good as you should be. And Texas fans, if you put a gun to their head, they would probably agree with that.
Brady's
Texas,
definitely coming out firing. I love it.
I
see, yeah,
am
it's like,
so much.
yeah, it's fun to talk about. Texas in 2024. I get people like Steve Sarkisian because he went through the coaching rehab with Nick Saban. So there's a track record. There's a track record there, I guess. To me, Sarkisian's always been like Diet Coke Lincoln Riley to me. He recruits exactly like Lincoln Riley. He coaches games exactly like Lincoln Riley, where and the OU game last year was a perfect example where Texas started to find like, okay, we have a little bit more talent than they do. We're starting to get kind of pull back on the rhythm of this game and take advantage of it. And then he just does a bunch of silly things for no reason. Like, hey, do the thing that works. And he's like, no, watch this. I'm gonna throw a slant route on the goal line to my 5'9" receiver who weighs 100 pounds. Like, this will work, trust me. And it doesn't. And then you find yourself in a tight ball game. And then are you gonna bank on Lincoln Riley or Steve Sarkisian in a tight ball game? Like, I wouldn't. I know people like him. I know people put a lot of stock in a returning quarterback. And, as an OU fan with a somewhat of an unknown with Jackson Arnold walking into the 2024 season, even though he's extremely talented and highly thought of, it would be nice to have experience walking into the SEC for year one. But Quinn Ewers he's okay. He's okay if the guy's wide open. Like he's fine. He can make the throws, but he doesn't scare me as an
Brady,
OU
I
fan.
love it. I love the audacity to come on a podcast. It just be like, Quinn Ewers is okay. Texas sucks.
Alabama fan
I love it. I love it
right now.
I love it.
I mean, I've had to hear how bad OU's defense was for the last decade. I had to hear how I know OU's defense looks better this year, guys, talking about last year, but actually like the advanced metrics say otherwise. And it's like, okay, all that's cute, but at no point did Quinn Ewers frighten me last year. He threw a pick on his second throw. Like I'm not afraid of this guy. He threw another pick. He fumbled at midfield after Peyton Bowen lit his ass up. So I'm not that frightened. Plus, all this to say, they lost a lot of skill production. And people are just like, no, Steve Sarkisian and Quinn Ewers box checked. They're going to be fine. Like, I mean, if I was a Tex fan, I hope. Isaiah Bond's a good player. I know you guys would know that. he's not AD Mitchell. He's not Xavier Worthy. Like, I don't think he's that type of player. He's a good player, but you don't replace those guys that went to the NFL in the first round with Isaiah Bond and say, oh yeah, we're just going to pick this up where we left off. Like, I'm sorry. Like, reality is going to hit them in the face pretty quickly. And if it's not in Ann Arbor against a really good Michigan defense in the Big House, I mean, they got OU and Georgia back to back relatively early in conference play. Like, reality is going to sink in pretty quick for them, I think.
Right.
So we can make the assumption you don't see Texas making the SEC championship game this year.
I really don't. And, OU fan here. So yes, our schedule is really hard. It's like it's criminally unfair how hard it is. And it's also
Welcome
even
to
more,
the SEC.
Yeah,
all of ours are that way.
Well, it's also even more unfair that they just used, like, between OU and Texas, like, we're just going to go by your success rate over the last 10 years to, justify schedules. And it's like, oh, you mean the decade where Texas was just awful and we were going to the playoff? Oh, that's fair. Yeah, that's awesome. But okay, like, we're OU, we like the challenge. But like, their schedule, especially in the back half, is a little tricky. I mean, they're going to be playing a bunch of teams that want to play them, and want to beat them. I mean, A&M on the road, that's going to be tough. Arkansas is an old rival, and Arkansas has had random success against them in the handful of times they've played over the last 15 years. It's not a schedule to me that I hear that it's easy. It's easy relative to OU's. But when I look at it, I'm like, for a team that's replacing a lot of skill production and by far their best players on defense, I mean, they're Texas, they recruit well, so they should have some players ready. But if they do not replace the players they had last year, I mean, Texas flirted with 2 or 3 extra losses in addition to OU last year in conference play. That team last year loses 2 or 3 games with this current schedule. So I'm interested. But I mean, we should not be immune to Texas preseason hype only for it to just go away 4 or 5 weeks into the year.
Right. Well,
and did we talk about it last week, or was it the week before, where we talked about Texas's running game's going to be a little?
I think it was last week.
Unlingered because they've lost RB1 and RB2.
Yeah,
so if that means you got to lean on Quinn, and according to what Brady just told us, we may not have to really be too concerned. That's an interesting little take.
Yeah, but now with the hype, everyone in the SEC is going to want to blow the brakes off of.
Oh yeah, they're going to come out
hype.
all gun blazing.
First year
Sure.
in the conference, nobody wants to be like, oh yeah, come on in, you deserve to be here. That's not how the SEC is. That's just, we're not that way. We're gonna want to show you that you made a mistake coming. I mean, welcome. How's your mom and them? Hope they're well, but also.
And now give us your lunch money.
And that's not just Alabama. Obviously, we have our own issues with Texas and needing to prove ourselves once again. But it's going to be the same for Oklahoma, though. Everyone's excited to have new competition within the conference. But I think it's one of those where the teams that are on the bottom half of the SEC, they don't want to be there. They don't want the new guys to beat them. They're really going to be gunning to prove that even the lowest in the SEC is better than the new guys. That's just how it is. So I'm going to be really interested to see when Texas travels, how much these teams come for them, because that's just the way it is. I mean, it's your induction into the SEC, and we're certainly not going to make it easy.